Greetings and welcome. Welcome everyone to the Mike from Newlands show. It's great to be back, and I thank you very much for taking the time out to watch the show today. Time is money, your time is valuable, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to watch the show. I hope in return I'm going to be able to give you some entertainment, some education, because in this particular show it's going to take a slightly different angle. We're going to look a bit back into the past. As my grandson said the other day, what's it like in the olden days, Granddad? Now, only your grandson can get away with saying that. But he reminded me how much this first show I did on the Mike van Newlands show, where we look back in the past and how many people expressed such an interest in it. So we're going to delve back into the past, and to help me do that, I've got a wonderful guest here. Alderman Demetri Qually. I'm going to look forward to chatting to Demetri and finding out kind of how he got into politics and what happened, because he came from a slightly different angle to me. But before I touch on that, I want to also just say thank you for everybody who commented so positively on the last show I did with Frank Rosen and his story and recovery from stage 4 cancer and the cannabis route that he took. I'm going to get Frank back because it was an outstanding show. So if you haven't watched it, do take a look at it. And he's going to bring with him an attorney. This attorney is going to help us understand how it works because there's two types of cannabis, and if you get it wrong, you could theoretically go to jail. So this attorney is going to help us explain how it works, what you can grow, what you can't grow, and take us through that particular legal aspect to the growing of marijuana. But let's talk a little bit about the show. So I was born in 1950. Apartheid arrived in 1948. It was enforced, I guess you could say, in 1948 and ran, as we know, to 1994. So when I was born in 1950, it had pretty much kicked in my 2 years. I was the son of an English couple that came out from South Africa, or came to South Africa after the war. My dad was a bomber pilot, and I think he was very glad to have made it out of the war alive and just looked for peace and sunshine. And for all sorts of reasons, they arrived in South Africa. And then we had apartheid. My dad did get involved because he wasn't happy, and he joined something called the Torch Commando, which was made up of veterans back in the day that already disapproved of the moves that the then National Party government was making. So interesting. And my dad was involved in that for a while. I was too young, but I was told about it later. But I think also, like everything, he was just very fatigued, just really wanted to get on with his life, raise his family, and enjoy being alive in South Africa. But when I turned 16, I kind of realized there was something not quite right in this wonderful country of ours. I went to a white school. I mean, everything was segregated. I ended up in the army, which was white. And the irony of it is, even in the army, I ended up in an English-speaking regiment. So not only were we divided in language, and we were also divided in color. It just was madness. Madness. When I look back at it, I must say, what were we thinking? But there's a question that is in the back of my mind, and it's kind of relevant to politics today. There were a lot of bad things under apartheid, and I am not for a second, please don't hit that button and start phoning me. I'm not advocating anything about apartheid as being successful. What I am saying is that we just seem to be in such a bad state today that I'm wondering how much better off we really are. Because our country is just honestly in a mess. And what really gets my goat is that we seem not to be doing anything about it. Under apartheid, I could do something. I felt that I could make a contribution. I was a member of ADAC, a crazy bunch called Alliance for Radical Change. Every time we had a meeting in the Rondebosch Town Hall, you could be sure as hell a smoke bomb or a tear gas bomb would come through the window because we were chased up and down the road by the police. Or I got attacked and held up against the wall and threatened by a policeman in the Maitland Town Hall when I went along to attend a National Party meeting wearing a tie-dyed ANC coloured T-shirt. But I felt, I was making a difference. We were moving against apartheid and things were happening. And certainly I could see it slowly crumbling until eventually it fell apart and sanity prevailed. Nelson Mandela was allowed out of jail. And for a brief while, South Africa looked like the best place in the world. But just this week, dear viewers, we had the president at a conference called the something or other corruption conference. Just in this week that he is chairing this, he is the speaker of the conference. Can you believe it? And he is being investigated at Parler for stuffing, I forget how much money, $580,000. Yep. Is that correct? Yeah. Stuck in his chair. I mean, what madness is he's lecturing us on the bad things of corruption will do to our country, but he's being investigated for it. This very same week, we have a shack, which some poor municipality that's already bankrupt, paid 38 million for. They have no money. There is surge in the streets, but this municipality paid 38 million rand for a shack, which they're going to call a call center, and then to rub salt into the wound, they go and get buy a mouse for 470 rand and pay for it every month, 470 rand. I pay 900 rand a month for my internet connection. They went and paid 28,000 rand a month. In the very, very same month, we've now got a new scandal that's just about to hit the news. And we had Fikile Mbalula rushing off to court because he, along with our Minister of Unemployment, Thulis Nesi, our Minister of Finance, who else was involved? I forget now. Minister of Health, I can't even remember his name and I don't particularly care. All have been implicated in asking for 500 million rand kickback into a contract that apparently they were going to be involved in. And Mr. Mdodwana, he is the guy that is now saying, well, he's got a signed contract for 5 billion rand and no, you can't have any kickbacks. So this is just in the 1 week in our country, and at the same week that we're having our president talk about fighting corruption. So I'm going to ask you to ponder on that, because I'd like you to come back to me and comment at the end of the show. Down at the bottom, leave your comments. Tell me what you think. Are we in a better place? It doesn't seem like it to me. It seems to me our government has failed us on almost every turn. Every single SOE is bankrupt. Every ministry is corrupt. I saw a balance sheet the other day where we have spent, I think it's 32 billion, and only we've got a return of 1 million rand from a crowd called Safcol, if I'm not mistaken, and they grow trees. That's all we have to show for our billions and billions that we've invested, love that word, invested our money into these scams. But let's see. Maybe we are in a better place. So Alderman Demetri Qually, thank you very, very much for coming on the show.
Greetings, Mike.
I'm just curious about the alderman. Just to explain, as I understand it, that's a title that you receive after so many years' service. Is that correct? What's the formula on that?
Yes, it is for 20 years continuous service as a councillor, or you get extra credit for the different positions you've held. So I got it after about 8 or 10 years, because I was on the Mayoral committee and a sub-council chair and those type of positions. Yes.
And is that a title you carry with you, but like a major in the army? Once you retire from the army, you can be kept. You're legitimately allowed to call yourself a major.
It's a lifetime.
It's a lifetime.
But you choose whether you use it or not. Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, Demetri, thanks again for clearing that up, and very warm welcome yet again. So let's talk a little bit about the days. we mentioned earlier, just before the show, that you weren't directly involved in politics initially. So how did it all start?
Well, first of all, you mentioned your date of birth. I was born in 1943. And I had probably the more enlightened parents as well, although they did get divorced, but they were on the more liberal side of South Africa. And in fact, my mother took part in the Women's March in Pretoria. So I was vaguely aware of situation sort of growing up. And then I started working. I was joined an auditing firm. And one of the people there to me one day said, would you like to come to a house meeting? So I said, fine, yeah, well, what's a house meeting? No, there's this party, the Progressive Party, that has just been formed. We're having a house meeting in Germiston. Would you like to come along? Okay. So I went along, and this man, and I don't remember who it was, spoke, sounded sensible, fair enough. Next day, when I went into work, Peter said, well, how did you enjoy it? I said, no, that was fine, thanks. He says, well, would you like to become a member? Well, yeah. What's that involved? Well, you just sign a form and you're part of the Progressive Party. So I joined it in 1961. There were elections in 61, and as what many people may not know, the Progressive Party was formed from dissidents from the United Party. So there were, I think it was 12 people who'd come across and formed it. But in 1961, the elections were very unkind to the Progressive Party, and only one person got elected, and that was Helen Suzman. And she remained the sole representative of the Progressive Party until 1974. So for 13 years she was on her own. And Colin Eglin was the leader, but not in Parliament. So yes, I was a member and continued to be a member and participate in elections. But in 1974, I was driving to work, and by that stage, having got married and 2 children, suddenly occurred to me, I thought, what are you going to say to your sons if they say, what did you do in the war, Dad? So I thought about it, and we were in a workshop environment. And as a result of that, I said, no, I've got to do something. I can't just stand by and let these things happen or do nothing to change the situation in South Africa. So I phoned up the Progressive Party and I said, I'm here. I'm happy to help in the 1974 election campaign. They said, thank you very much. Where do you stay? Well, I gave them my address. We'll get back to you. Well, I waited for about a week and heard nothing. So I phoned them up again and said, I'm here.
Still here.
What about making use of me? Anyway, they said, well, where are you and where have you been before? And I was in the Parktown constituency in my membership years, not at that stage because we were living elsewhere then. They said, well, yeah, why don't you get involved in Parktown? So I said, okay, I did, joined. Someone sat me down and we talked about canvassing and, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go and visit houses and talk about the politics and see if we can get their support.
If I can just get this, because I was just did a quick calculation, I was 24. So when you took over, you got involved in Parktown. Now, Parktown, if I'm not mistaken, was United Party.
Yes.
Right, I remember that. And I can't remember who was the leader of the United Party back then. Can you remember?
Well, originally it was de Villiers-Graaff, and
right.
I think that remained for
Sir
quite a while.
Sir de Villiers-Graaff.
Yes, Sir de Villiers-Graaff,
yes. So, and am I right in just saying that, just for our viewers, that we had the National Party, which
dominated
literally. I mean, and then you had the United Party kind of was considered to be a more liberal party and was against apartheid, but not quite, because it kind of...
That's being kind.
Yeah, it was being kind. Well, you can be brutal now, I don't mind, but that's kind of the way I sort of saw them. And, I struggled with the difference, which is why I went straight to the Progressive Party. Was it then the Progressive Party? Because, it was absolute nonsense. The National Party, United Party, they were, two sides.
Variations on the
thing. Yeah, exactly right. So anyway, so now we have the National Party in power with a huge majority. We have the United Party, which was slightly more liberal, and they had a fair amount of seats, mainly, I would imagine, in the urban areas.
Correct.
Fine.
And fragmenting, as I said,
right.
The formation of the Progressive Party was people who felt that the United Party was not doing enough.
Yes.
And so they left, but then didn't get re-elected. So for 13 years, actions had happened, but no results. So yes, I got involved.
So there's Demetri slaving behind the scenes.
Yeah, so they talk about this canvassing. We go out together. It was with a young woman. I don't remember her name. We did 3 or 4 houses, and she said, "Okay, you do the next one." What me? Anyway, I took the challenge and got going in that election campaign. And I got pretty active. I must have canvassed at least 300 people, possibly a bit more. And it was a victorious election for the Progressive Party in the sense that we won 6 seats then, and shortly thereafter in a by-election, because one of the candidates had died before the election, to become 7. But I'd canvassed 300 people, and we won the parliamentary seat with René de Villiers.
Oh, I remember him.
And that was by a much lesser margin. I forget the exact number. But I immediately knew the pleasure and pain of politics. Because René de Villiers got elected, and he'd been the editor of the Star, maybe that recognition or that...
Remember that. Yes, indeed.
That helped. But Thelma Henderson, who was for the provincial parliament, didn't get elected. Sam Moss got elected there. So, pleasure and pain. But there are also a few recollections of that. Rupert Lorimer beat... I just forget his name for the moment, a stalwart of the United Party who was adamant. I think it was a Milan, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But there was this picture of him absolutely dejected like this after the campaign and the victory. So that was totally unexpected. But that saw the advance of the Progressive Party, and it sort of went from there. So after the election, there was a thank you party, which I went to. It was very nice. And then they said, all right, we will have a wrap-up meeting. And at the meeting, one of the workers for the party or the employees of the party said, well, why don't you join the committee? Committee? Oh, well, okay.
Just a worker.
Yeah. So I did, and I became a member of the Parktown branch, and that lasted for quite a while. And in fact, in one way or another, I've remained active in the party, and till today, I still am active in different roles.
May I just interrupt for a second here? So here we are now. You've been in politics for how long now? Up until that point when you would join the first committee for Parktown.
Well, 1974.
1974. So now what was happening is, because this is where I sort of started to get involved, because now I looked at this strange situation with all these white people running around voting for each other. But then the army got hold of me. Well, I knew the army was coming at that stage, and I started to take a serious interest in the military and as to what was going on, the border wars and so on. Because while we're running around essentially within the white community, we've got a black community that was sitting in Alexander and all
Soweto.
those, Soweto. Mm-hmm. And they were getting a little bit agitated, quite rightly. Plus, and I think this is where the Progressive Party started to get some growth as well, or some traction, is because the rest of the world is starting to say, hang on a second, we can't be doing business with South Africa. This is tricky, this is not right. It's enforced racism. So I think then that's when those wheels, you were right there at the right time, because then suddenly, am I right, that there was starting to be, people were starting to look at the Progressive Party and say, crumbs, this is actually maybe our way out of this quagmire that we are now in called apartheid. But what would you say to that?
I think that's probably a little optimistic at that stage, because it still took a long while before there was substantial growth. And it took the disintegration of the United Party to finally do it and lead to the Progressive Party becoming the official opposition. But yes, those roots, the plants were planted at that stage. So yes, things were starting to change.
And then what happened next?
Well, so I got involved in the committee and the branch, and as a result of that, also involved in the Southern Transvaal region. So at this stage was all Joburg based. We then, as a family, moved to our first house in Brenander, which is next door to Krugersdorp, and I became the chair and we formed and became the chair of a new branch, the first branch. Okay. So it was establishing, there was no
breaking new ground there.
Existing branch, absolutely. And it was a very peculiar constituency. You get the limitation which defines the borders of constituencies. So it's not just a general popular vote, you vote in particular constituencies. But this one was made up of the remnants of all the other voting districts or constituencies. So it stretched from Krugersdorp to Kempton Park, and from Roodepoort to Broederstroom. You just think of that area. So it was 7 voting districts or something like that. Wow. So a little pocket.
It's like a small country.
But yeah, just an impossible situation. So we formed this after the election had been called, but we had an enthusiastic branch and we were active, and also in line with what you were saying about this growing realization that there needed to be a new way. We managed to retain our deposit. And in those days, if you didn't get 25% of the vote, you lost your deposit. So although the National Party beat us, hammered us actually, but we got, I think, 27 or 28%, which is quite significant for a 6-week campaign to get from nowhere to somewhere. And quite interesting, the candidate that was so dismissive of us before, but at the results election, he was somewhat chastened. Still somewhat arrogant, but somewhat chastened.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yes, sure, of course.
So it's just listening to you, something occurred to me, because I also got involved in canvassing and did a fair amount of it. And this is where, to my mind, becomes interesting. Because the UDF hadn't quite formed, but we had now this fairly radical kind of politics developing in the sense of one man, one vote. Now, the Progressive Party's policy, and this is where I'm going to look to you for some correction here, if there is any that's needed, is they said, look, we suggest that we do it this way. If you've got a certain education, you can get a certain percentage of the vote. So the higher your education, the more votes. Was it not weighted in that way?
No, it was called the qualified franchise.
Qualified. Yeah,
so if you achieved a minimum level of education, then you got the vote.
Right.
There was no fraction of the
because vote. That was the problem. It wasn't a problem for me, actually. I found it quite a healthy is the wrong word. It assisted me in garnering votes. I needed, as I was working then for the Progressive Party in Pinelands and Wynberg and all over the place, as just like you, a worker, going around with those cards, if you remember, a bunch of cards and yes, no, bugger off.
The two-card system.
The two-card system, yes.
One in filed in alphabetical order in the office and other filed in street order when you went canvassing.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
Absolutely right. And so I would do all that, but you would knock on the door. Now, you know this guy says, the card says, this guy's going to tell you to bugger off. And then he says, ja meneer, wat? And you go, oh, ja, middag meneer, ek is van die Progressive Party. You can imagine the language after that for some of these guys. But at least I could try and sell them something because they were so verkrumped. Is that an old-fashioned word? I don't even knows what it means anymore. But they were so like set in their ways. It was divide the races or nothing. So at least you could say to the guy, well, I could say, guy, look, be reasonable here. How can you possibly deny anybody, they live in a country, the guy's a doctor for crying in a bucket, and you're going to tell me on the basis of his skin that he can't vote? I mean, surely that can't be right. My Afrikaans is a bit better in those days, so I actually said in Afrikaans. But, and I very often made a little progress. I'm not suggesting for a second I converted any one of them, but at least it got me a foot in the door. Because there was nothing else offered at the time. But at the same time, the Progressive Party's taken criticism for that. And in a way, now it's spilled over to the DA in today's politics because they throw that back at us and saying, yeah, but you guys were, supporters of apartheid. But if you look back on it, we were certainly none of that. And I mean, Helen Suzman, good grief. She stood in Parliament for, 8 years on her own. I mean, don't for a second tell me that she was in any way in favor of apartheid. But it is kind of annoying because people didn't fully understand. This is just me talking now. I don't have any, but I'm talking personally as well. That, it sounds terrible now, but at the time, it was the only way to really get a foot in the door because there was plenty of, we've got a defense force and we've got all the guns and, we'll just sort it all out. It was that kind of attitude. The reality amongst many of the Afrikaner community hadn't quite sunk in that the rest of the world was not enjoying the fact that they were doing business with a country called South Africa because of apartheid. And they hadn't quite come to terms with that fact. So what's your comments on that? What do you feel about it? Am I right, wrong? How did you handle it? And where are we today?
There's that beautiful Afrikaans expression, ja, nee.
Yeah.
So I agree and also disagree with some of your comments there. Absolutely. The qualified franchise was certainly an official policy of the Progressive Party. And I think you're correct in saying that that's opened the door for certain people because, yes, it would be, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas, for people were saying it's going to be a civilized electorate. But there are qualifications. I mean, there's an age qualification, for example, even now. And anywhere, you need to be a citizen of the country to have the vote. But those things did happen. But there were many other things, and don't sell yourself short. I'm sure that you did convert some people. Just the fact that here was a young guy knocking on the door, talking about the future, and causing some people to think. I must just relate to something that occurred to me while you were talking there. One of the canvas calls that I did, I knocked on the door, and as you correctly said, you had this bunch of cards. And can I speak to Mr. So-and-so? And I was speaking to Mrs. So-and-so. Well, he's not here at the moment. Okay, well, that's fine, but tell me, how are you going to vote? I don't know, I must ask my husband. And that was a reality too, That,
absolutely was.
Too many people didn't think about it.
Absolutely was. Yeah.
And politics in many ways is really, the vote is an emotional response rather than a considered logical response. You've said several times as well that the rest of the world did this, I'm not sure the rest of the world did. Much of the world did. Many countries did, but I'm certainly not sure. At that stage, communism was the rooi gevaar as well as the swart gevaar featured very strongly in South African politics. And then you had Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher, who, while critical of some elements of South Africa, certainly did not abandon or felt it as was a bulwark against communist expansion in Africa. So there were a number of issues influencing people.
Yeah, that's fair. I have to say, I suppose I was kind of looking at it more from a student basis at that time.
Yep.
Because when I got to live in London, I immediately joined up with the ANC. And it was quite bizarre actually watching. So I wasn't active. Let me not just qualify that by saying I was a bit flippin' useless. I was too busy trying to earn some money, take a particular girl out and afford the cost of a pint of beer, which even in those days was horrendously expensive. Nothing's changed. But it was interesting recruiting people, and there was an amazingly strong movement within the students amongst all the universities and the technical colleges. And back in the day, if you remember, they had this 24-hour day, 7-day week protest outside South Africa House. So there was a strong, but you are right. Certainly you are right, because as Maggie Thatcher was around and she came, and then after, and she was certainly not a supporter of apartheid, because I admired her enormously, but she was pragmatic. She kind of knew that, there's no point in taking people out of work. And so I got her argument. She didn't support apartheid, but she said, well, what's the point of making people unemployed? That just makes it worse. And so I kind of loved her for that. And I think that was to some extent possibly the attitude of the American, who were big investors in South Africa in those days. We had General Motors and all those other big manufacturers. So, yeah, that's probably from where I'm coming from. Yeah, and you're right in a way, it did take a while for that to settle down. So once, you see, you in Joburg, and then you ended up in Cape Town.
No,
or you?
It took a while before Cape Town. I became ultimately the chairperson of the Southern Transvaal region. So I was still very much Joburg-based until 1988. I moved down to Cape Town. In 1983, there was a referendum, if you recall.
I do, yes. Wasn't it the yes referendum or something?
Ja of nee.
Ja of nee. Here we go again.
Yes. And that was for the tricameral parliamentary system.
Good grief, I'd forgotten all about that.
There you go.
Yes,
and
indeed.
So the pressure, and there was certainly world pressure, and there was internal pressure sort of happening. So it sort of forced the Nats to reconsider, and they came up with this idea of the three houses, one for the whites, one for the Indians, and one for the coloureds, but nothing for the blacks.
Right.
Because they would have to go to their homelands, which it really was a Verwoerdian concept of the homelands. And that was a way of
trying to
yielding to the pressures, but still not losing control. So we entered the Progressive Party, was saying no to the tricameral system. And someone you will remember well had become my chairperson of organisation in the Southern Transvaal Executive, Robin Carlisle.
Oh, yes.
And we were out canvassing for this as well. And it was about 8 o'clock at night, and we were just pausing between sort of calls. And Robin said, I've got this feeling in my bones. I really feel we're going to pull this one off. And I still rag Robin about that today. So we certainly lost that referendum significantly. The tricameral system did get implemented, but it just didn't solve any problems, as the homeland system did. So there are many sort of wasted opportunities that South Africa has been through.
Can I just say something on the tricameral parliament before you go on? Again, just for our viewers, because I'm sure many of them have never heard of it. It didn't last long. I think it lasted about a year. If I'm not mistaken,
it was short-lived. Yes,
it was very short-lived. And I actually went to one of their sessions, because just to put things in context, and by then my wife was working in Parliament, working for the then Progressive Party, and in fact worked for Alex Barain. So I had the inside track to a lot of what was going on through my wife. And so if there were any interesting sessions and debates coming up, I would get tipped off and off I'd go. So I went to the tricameral parliament, and if I remember correctly, it was across the road from Parliament. And it's still used to this day. It's got that kind of stone-type building. But my overriding thought was I walked in there and I sat down and they had like a raised area at the back by the door. And as you come in, and there was nobody there except me and I think 2 reporters. That was it, because it had zero credibility.
Right.
And I just remember going there because now all these guys that were in, the colour guys, Indian guys, all became quite famous. And one was Raj Bansi, I think he was there.
I'll double cross that bridge when I get to it.
Always love him for saying that, and he never denied it either. Good for him. Raj Bansi. And then we had some...
Hendricks, wasn't it?
Hendricks, yes.
Yeah.
And no, they were all seen as absolute sellouts. They had no credibility. They just talked amongst themselves. And whatever they said, nobody cared anyway, because there was no way was it going to influence what the National Party were going to do in Parliament.
Yeah.
But it was a very expensive exercise, and also resulted in that a bigger state at the top, but up kind of the Duval Drive area. It's still there to this day. And they eventually put up these massive security fences and lights and stuff, because these guys they couldn't go and stay in their houses because they were just seen as traitors. You know, the communities had rejected them, so they had to live in this compound. Which, you know, I remember seeing it from Duval Drive. As I say, it's still there to this day. But yeah, anyway, so just aside, so that was it. So we had in our parliament, we had the tricameral parliament, and then of course we had, if you were black, then you were allocated a homeland, and you would go back and vote there. And
you could work elsewhere.
You could work elsewhere. Well, yeah, the Dawn Pass, of course.
Yeah,
You had to carry that with you. And so from there, you're now chairman of Transvaal.
Southern Transvaal.
Southern Transvaal.
Yeah. And then during my term of office in 1986, there was a devastating development. You will recall, Mike, that we had a very charismatic and intellectual leader in Franzel Slabbert.
Oh, indeed.
And he finally decided that there was no future in this system.
Right.
And that he couldn't make the changes or bring them up, so he resigned. Now, as the chairperson, I then phoned the chairperson, the chairperson of the Federal Council, Alex Barain. And I said to Alex, no, we can't have this. We've got to get him to change his mind. What do we do? Alex was saying, I don't know. A week later, he resigned from the party.
Correct.
So it was devastating. So from this party that had come from nowhere, had grown, was making progress, to suddenly being faced with this sort of self-implosion, and I was the chairman of this. So that was a really challenging time.
I remember it very well.
Me.
In fact, I was actually in the house when that announcement was made.
Wow.
I was tipped off, and I can tell you my source was my wife, of course.
Of course. Almost very
very few people
knew about it.
I got it in a coded fashion, so she just said, "Be there."
Yeah.
And Franzel Slabbert, for any of the viewers, was the most wonderful man. This is a book that he wrote called The Last White Parliament, and he was an Afrikaner. But just a fantastic guy. And he still very much haunts the ANC, because he was asked to do a report many years later, which was called the Franzel Slabbert Report, I think. And in that report, he said, or took the view and advised the ANC, which I believe, had they taken his advice, would be a lot better off today than they are now. And his advice was, go back to the constituency system. The list system,
a multi-member,
exactly, is not going to work, because the member of parliament has no credibility with his constituency. He's not elected by them. He's dropped on them from, in this case, Loot Freely House, and that's the end of it. So I can't stop saying Lutfriedi. It's in my genes now. But he recommended, and I think honestly, Demetri, if they'd taken Van Zyl-Slabbit's advice and taken that report to heart, the corruption that has occurred would never have occurred, because the MPs would be responsible to the person in their
and could be removed.
And could be removed by the constituency. And I think the ANC, because I've got no wish to see the ANC, I was a big fan of the ANC. I gave them a lot of support in the past. So their demise now would give me great pleasure, but it wouldn't then, and I'm just fed up with them. And it's such a great pity that they didn't have the courage to take that report on, because as I say, had they had that, there would have been more checks and balances. The corruption that's now destroying not only the ANC, because the ANC is on its way out, so is the country.
Yeah, and further, I mean, the constitution that we operated under still gives far too much power to the president, for example. And it was fine under Mandela, because he was an honourable man and saw a bigger picture. But, for example, under Zuma, and you've got to even say under Ramaphosa, there are all these corruption cases and things just get delayed, and no consequences seem to come by. So, yes, there are significant improvements that could come. But I agree with you, a constituency-based system, and it was a multi-member constituency, so you would get 2 or 3 parties probably elected in a constituency, but they are responsible to the constituents and
Correct.
Not to the party, or there's a shared responsibility, so that would improve the situation. So that would still make a difference even today, but we're not there. Yeah,
when did you come to Cape Town?
In 1988, but just before that,
Yep.
so in 1987 there was an election.
1987.
1987 there was an election,
Yeah.
and I was still the chairperson of the Southern Transvaal, and it was a big setback for the party.
Wow.
We really didn't do well in those elections.
Can I ask you how many MPs did the Progressive Party have then in Parliament?
About
6 or 7?
No, I think it was more, but
about 14.
Still small, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the constituency, which had then become North Rand constituency, and I'll give you a little story about that. Even though we did much, much better than our initial 27-28% that we got in what was then Witwatersburg and became North Rand, the NP still won it. But in that campaign, there was the National Party candidate, and we put up a young businessman as our candidate, Rob Conway. I'm struggling to remember the name of the Nat Party candidate. He was really an insignificant figure, but anyway.
That's why you can't remember the name.
Exactly. But he put up these election posters, the face posters, and he put up a poster of him about 20 years younger than he actually was. So Rob Conway looked at this, and he put up a picture of himself on his posters, of him as a young boy, like a young teenager. So 20 years younger as well. And that caused, it made international news. So even, I don't know if you were in London at that stage, but it even reached that far. But unfortunately not enough to win. So yes, then we moved down to Cape Town in 1988, and walking along the Muizenberg beach, we bought a house in Marina da Gama, and walking along the Muizenberg beach, bumped into James Self, who I got to know quite well because as the Southern Transvaal chairperson, I was part of the federal executive and would meet, and James was the organisational leader. But he said, what you're doing?
Yeah. What you're doing here?
Yeah. Oh, well, you must get involved. And so got involved with the Simonstown constituency. And then in 1989, again, I was an early election called by the Nats. So whereas we'd gone very much backwards in 1988, we had now become the Progressive Federal Party. There'd been sort of several formations.
Correct.
And we merged with the party of Dennis Worrell and the National Democratic Movement of Wynand Malan. They'd been breakaways from...
Oh, so these were breakaways from the National Party.
Correct.
I'd forgotten all that.
Yes,
it's all coming back to me now.
They
Yes.
formed these
little
parties,
groups.
but they came together with the PFP and then formed the Democratic Party.
Right.
And so in the 1989 election, we became again the official opposition. So it was again growth.
Yeah.
So 1987 was depressing, but 1989 we saw...
So you
resurgence.
took over from the United Party.
Correct.
And squeezed them out.
Well, they were disappearing.
Or
yes.
they were disappearing anyway. And I think, am I right, David Graaf, was he then not leader, or I know that he was involved. That was the son of Sir de Villiers Graaf.
I don't know whether he became
whatever
leader or not.
happened.
I was not overly concerned with him. But
Okay, so here we are, official opposition. Your
so
post
what
then-
I could maybe just briefly outline for the people. So in 1959, the Progressive Party got formed.
Yep,
That was the
1959.
breakaways, 1959,
Right.
breakaway from the United Party. In 1975, we became the Progressive Reform Party. That's when Yapi Besson left the United Party and went on his own and then joined up with us. And apparently he joined and left and rejoined 15 times in his political career from different parties. Then in 1975, we became the Progressive Federal Party. That's when Harry Schwartz and
Do
Robert
remember him.
Enthoven and Dick Enthoven and others came across. Then, as I've just pointed out, in 1989, it became the Democratic Party.
So then who was the leader then? Can you remember?
It would have been Colin Eglin.
Colin Eglin, yeah. So he was well entrenched in Parliament then. Yeah.
And then finally, we haven't got there yet, but in 2000 we became the Democratic Alliance.
Yeah.
But so anyway, in 1989 we significantly increased our representation, so there was growth once again.
So just to get a handle on this, Colin Eglin became the leader of, and he was an excellent leader. I remember him very, very well.
He was a leader, and then Slubbert took over. Slubbert beat him
For the job.
and grew and got following, and then moved out.
Yeah.
Then Colin Eglin, big, magnanimous of him, I felt, came back and did a really good job.
That's quite right. He stepped into the fold when Van Slubbert left.
Correct.
Just as an aside, and because Van Slubbert, I mean, he did wonders for the party, but the power lay in the fact that he was an Afrikaner, full-on Afrikaner, and the Afrikaners in the National Party couldn't stand that. And
what was worse, he was a liberal Afrikaner.
liberal Afrikaner, jeepers, it was just a nightmare for them. So. Yet, at the same time, I still remember in the speech when he left Parliament, he made the point that he was felt he was being used. He was giving Parliament credibility, because the then possibly P.W. Botha would love to say to the media overseas, yeah, but look at this, we've got an Afrikaner in the opposition benches, we're a democracy, and and he's in the system, so it can't be all bad. And I think Van Slubbert said, no, I don't want to be part of the system. And that's when he took the decision. And I still remember the look on PW's face, because I was sitting on the top benches on the left, and he looked devastated, because he knew that this was a blow it was a blow to the National Party. And I still remember him scurrying down past the speaker to sort of shake his hand, totally shocked by the fact that he was leaving, because he literally got up and walked. And everybody just sat around, couldn't believe what was happening.
Just as a personal aside, when you've mentioned P.W. Botha, at one stage I was running a video production business, producing corporate videos, and I got contracted by a property company to do a video of a house for sale in the wilderness, which turned out to be P.W. Botha's house.
Good grief. Die Anker.
So I actually went down there to do the videoing, and met with PW, and it was most intriguing. There was this old man, he was now out of politics. He'd been replaced by FW de Klerk. And I don't know, he was almost looking for respect or something from me, looking for me to do something, but a very strange man had taken me around his house. And then there was this room with a whole lot of chairs, probably about 20 chairs in a sort of auditorium type formation. And that's where the inner kring, the inner circle of the National Party used to meet. So I was doing videos all around and then got to his bedroom, and there was a big teddy bear on his bed. Really big. If I remember correctly, it was even a pink teddy bear.
Good grief.
Whatever.
What was the significance of that?
Most intriguing. I don't know. But he was a broken man at that stage.
He was.
Yeah,
he was completely, yes. I remember he donated or put on show exhibition at the George Museum. A lot of his...
Yeah, because he was in the Southern Cape, yeah.
Yeah. And so he offered to put it all on, but the museum staff were not happy about that at all. So you literally had to go and get a key to go down and look at it. And when I got there, they just said, no, you're not going to see it. You're not. So I never even got to see it because I was curious. He was given a rifle that was painted white. And I don't know, there was all sorts of odd things that he'd collected over the years as gifts. But just as an interesting side to that, and it's just come to me now, you talk about the demise of P.W. Botha. I had a building that came up for sale in Bellville, just off Voortrekker Road. And I too went around this building taking pictures. And there was one room that was closed. And I said to the fellow that had the keys, who didn't own the building, but he had the keys to the building, what's in that room? He said, no. He says, that's the last tenants, that's their stuff. They're going to come and collect it. I said, well, can I have a look? He said, I just want to see how big the room is, and I've got the plans with me. And so he said, yeah. And he fumbled, found the key, opened it up, and there was this treasure trove, if you could call it that, of National Party memorabilia. There was a lectern, flags, badges. I said, what? Where does this come from? He said, no, this is the National Party's headquarters. He said, but since they've closed, this is it. It was a bit like, seeing something like the Nazi Party left behind the Second World War. It was like all this weird stuff.
Yeah. And
it had nowhere to go. And I sort of feel whatever happened to it, because love it or hate it, it was memorabilia back from those days. But anyway, where it went, I don't know. But it was interesting how the mighty, mighty National Party,
collapsed,
which you thought, was never going to leave, a bit like the ANC, till God comes back. Well, there it was in the room, in a pathetic little pile of dusty, unwanted rubbish, basically all it was. Sorry, but I digress slightly there. So we're back in South Africa. You're back in Cape Town, and we're now doing well. We're back in Parliament. We've got Colin Egland running the show. Nelson Mandela's in the background at that stage. I think there's lots of toing and froing. If I'm not mistaken, Helen Suzman had already visited him a few times.
Well, I'm sure you've seen it. There's that iconic photograph of Nelson Mandela hugging Helen Suzman.
Where is
that? Was after he'd been released, and I think that was the opening of Parliament.
Yes,
but
it was. Yes,
he was saying how much, and he publicly acknowledged how much she had done to help change the situation in South Africa.
Yes,
and she was just.
Yeah. I do remember the picture.
That
Yes, indeed. No, I was thinking of something different. Yeah, no, I do remember that picture. So it was a famous picture. And he was one of the first people that he looked up when he came to town. And, it was, in fact, I saw quite a lot of Helen Suzman in those days. We had one or two functions. And, in fact, when I first met Nelson Mandela at a private function that my wife and I were invited to, she was there as well. As a speaker there, but there was only about 15 of us there, and it was a wonderful privilege.
Lovely, yeah.
It was. It was at the Holiday Inn in Eastern Boulevard, of all places. And just to my regret, I never took a picture, but I felt so sorry for the guy that, he had the press there. We didn't have cell phones in those days. So it was this flash all over the place. And I thought, I just can't do it to him. But he would have, said, shook my hand.
He was remarkable.
He had the patience of a saint. And but just as a funny aside, so my wife and I in the queue to go into this room now, but we had to go through this big old kind of a metal detector. It was like an archway. You remember those things?
Like in the airport, yes.
That's right. Massive bloody thing. Which they dragged into the hotel. Anyway, we all walked through this thing, and there weren't that many of us, but I looked for about 5 or 6 couples ahead of us. I said, no, I'm sure that's Nelson Mandela. She said, that can't be. I said, no, I'm telling you, that's him. She said, but he's in the queue to go through the metal machine.
Exactly.
It turned out his security was saying to him, no, so you don't have to go through, this is... No, if they're going through the metal detector, I'm going through the metal detector. So it was a quite bizarre thing that he walked through, and of course his security was all white guys. It was just like amazing, and they got on so well. There was a nice rapport between them. It was just like such a wonderful time. But anyway, it was a great experience. Treasure it.
Is what South Africa can and should be.
Indeed, yeah.
And instead we have senior politicians, cabinet ministers and others driving in convoys, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 security vehicles behind, pushing their way through the traffic. If the privileged had to send their kids to government schools, had to go to government hospitals, I think we would be a very different place. But there's a totally...
Absolutely. And I mean, as you say, it's 9 million rand. I counted one row of cars there. If there was less than 7 million rand, I would have been surprised in this convoy. I mean, it's outrageous. But as you say, I think that is the test, isn't it? It's funny. They all go to private hospitals. They all go to private schools.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's go
back a little bit.
Let's go back a little bit. We've got Colin Eglin in Parliament. We've got Helen Suzman now seeing a lot of Nelson Mandela. And the mood is round about then, things are going to change?
Well, for me, the key aspect here, and I was now in Cape Town working for a computer company, and our offices were in Golden Acre. And on the 2nd of February in 1990, I was walking past our demonstration room, which had a TV screen, and it happened to be on, and I saw it was going to be a parliamentary speech by the President, F.W. de Klerk. So I stopped and went in. So I saw F.W. deliver his speech in Parliament, right, releasing... unbanning the ANC and releasing Nelson Mandela. But I was in the office and overlooking the Houses of Parliament, and I just had this magnificent sense of history, of being in the moment, and sort of looking and seeing it there, and then looking and saying it's all happening there. And so things have improved. And the reality is things did improve significantly, despite many hassles along the way. It wasn't it wasn't conflict-free and trouble-free, but at the same time, that was the start of the resurrection of South Africa. And at that stage, building up to the elections, the 94 elections, I put myself forward, and I got to number 7 on the DP's provincial list. But we only got 3 people elected. And then one other got elected, who was Helen Ziller, got elected. So there were 4 representatives in provincial parliament. So it was back to the drawing board.
Back to the drawing board. So just you mentioned a few acronyms there. I'm not quite sure. What does that mean? What was the DP? You said...
It was the Democratic Party.
But before that, you stood as an MP.
No, it was MPL.
MPL,
Remember the provincial legislature?
Member the provincial legislature.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, of course. Okay, sorry, MPL. So you didn't crack that one?
No.
But
and
Helen's,
if you remember that the National Party got the most seats, but together with the DP formed a government.
Right.
And Helen Suzman was the Minister of Education. Helen Ziller. The other Helen, yeah.
The other one.
Was the Minister of Education, and Henny Bester was also on the cabinet, and Joe Marks was Minister of Arts and Culture.
Yes.
And responsible for renaming the Artscape to the Artscape. It was the DF Milan Theatre before, if you remember.
That's right. I do remember. In fact, just talking briefly, I've got this book here. Now, here's the book. I can't recommend enough. This is a wonderful book, dear viewers. It's in the public library, just so you know, and it is an easy read. Don't be put off by its thickness, because I was a little intimidated, but once I picked this up, I couldn't put it down. Now, in this book is mentioned Demetri Qually a few times.
Yep.
And I now went to the unfortunately, I couldn't find it, but I remember reading it. And you were obviously very close to Helen Ziller. At that stage, she was Premier? No. What was your background there?
The mayor, she became mayor of Cape Town.
Right.
That's interesting. I'll just backtrack one moment. I'll come to that.
Do.
So in 1996, we had municipal elections. So not having succeeded in the 1994 parliamentary elections, I stood as a councillor in South Peninsula Municipality and got elected and was leader of the opposition to the National Party at that. And I became a deputy chairperson of the EXCO when the DA was formed. But in 2001, the DA had been formed and we gained the majority. Well, we got the most votes.
Right.
But when Helen became mayor, it was on the 15th of March, and I, together with the other elected councillors, was sitting there, and the ANC, I'm leaping forward here because it wasn't in 2001, but you asked about Helen Ziller and my connection. And the ANC had formed the government, taken over with a crossover clause, and had gained power in the city of Cape Town. And a couple of people had defected from us, David Early being one of them. And 15th of March was my birthday. And we convened the council meeting now to elect the mayor and the speaker and all of those. And there was lots of backwards and forwards between the different caucuses, and there was an independent from the PAC, not an independent, a single councillor from the PAC. Anyway, so they now cast the election. The first one is for the speaker. So Norma Indian Faketa is sitting there like this, sort of very confident, and David Early is sort of... And they count the votes. And we won the speaker by a single vote. So there's this devastation, and suddenly and David Early, and then comes to the election for Helen Ziller, and the PAC guy apparently abstained, so she won by 2 votes. And that was my biggest birthday present ever. But as a result of that was my first time of really engaging with Helen Ziller is when she became the mayor and I was the councillor. When I was chairperson of the Southern Transvaal, some of the youth members, or prominent in the youth organisation, the DA Youth, was Tony Leon and Helen Ziller. So there had been a connection before, but not really a memorable one. I didn't really remember them at that stage. So yeah, that 1994, pre-1994, and Mike, you must have stood in the queue as well, but we had these massive queues in the 1994 election. And there was just this joy around this feeling of freedom that suddenly the air was clear and citizens all over South Africa.
It was a wonderful time, just a wonderful time.
It was just
people
such
you
a
didn't know, you would
magnificent
never
feeling.
even spoken to,
And
from the other side of the
the
country.
fact that you stood there for 10 hours in the queue or something didn't matter because
best part ever.
it was
Absolutely the best part. Yeah.
Yes.
No, indeed, and we briefly had those days back with the Springboks. I mean, they did us proud in France.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's like, and I relived that actually, those days, that just briefly, unfortunately, just for a week, and then reality came back. And that game is almost forgotten. But it was wonderful just to have that feel-good experience, and it reminded me just how close this country is to being such a fantastic country.
Absolutely.
And how saddened I am about the way politics have turned. And we, frankly, we seem to be just run by a syndicate of criminals. That's all I can really say. Unfortunately, Alderman Demetri Qually, we've kind of run out of time.
Okay.
Which is a little bit of a pity, because there are a few more things that I wanted to ask you, and I've got a few books here. But I think in the interests of honouring my promise of not keeping you here all day, it has been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. I do say very often there's always room for more, and we might well get you back. There's a few other things that keep coming into my head, and forgive me if I've rudely interrupted you now and again, but I get a bit carried away, and you've brought back an incredible time in my life. One that's basically very frustrating when I look at where we are now as a country. I think, God, I spent all those Saturdays where my friends were watching rugby and I was walking around with this pack of blue cards taking abuse from various parts of Wynberg and Plumstead and Brooklyn for that matter. Herbie Hirsch rings a bell. I mean, I think I stood for him. Yeah, I worked for him. So I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate you taking out the time. And it's been fascinating listening to you. I hope listeners, that you've got a sense of, and viewers, a little idea of what it was like in those days. And just, it was just different. I think, in conclusion, I need to remind you all that we didn't actually have free radio. We had the SABC, which was strictly controlled by the Boerebond. We had no TV until 1994, 5. God, I can't remember when TV came out.
Yeah, I think it was 78 or something.
78,
like
sorry, sorry. 70,
black and white TV.
Black and white, yeah, strictly controlled. But up until then, we had no TV. So when I was growing up, 16 and 17, my only source of news was SABC, which was very strictly managed. And then, of course, the wonderful press. We had the free media, which really was free. We had the bravest editors in the world, if you ask me, who took unbelievable chances. The Daily Dispatch was such a great paper, the Cape Times and the Argus. They all pushed the limits, and very often the editors were attacked. They had to have armed protection. I remember the one editor, Tony Hurd, I think it was, took a lot of abuse, but they stood by their guns and they gave us as best they could the news, that the good and the bad as to what was happening in our country, that we really was, had no real idea because we had no access. And certainly no call-in radio stations, and certainly no opportunity, as we've got here on the Cape Conscious Media platform or the Mike from Newlands show, to talk about things freely, discuss, and this is such a wonderful opportunity. And very often this is why I'm here, because I am of the firm opinion that the ANC would shut this down tomorrow if they could. The similarities between the ANC and the old National Party sometimes I find are frightening. So as long as we keep shows like this alive, and people are allowed to come on and have their say without fearing any kind of retribution, I'm all in favor. So by watching shows like this and taking time out, you are indeed supporting free media. Cape Conscious Media is a great platform, lots of great shows. So please, ladies and gentlemen, viewers, thanks very much for watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the show. It helps the old algorithm get going. Don't forget that I am going to have Frank back as a repeat guest with his attorney very, very shortly to give us the background on the legalities of growing marijuana in your backyard. Very, very interesting program that's going to be. And let me just leave you with the thoughts of somebody an American philosopher called Thomas Sowell. I hope I've pronounced his name correctly. And he says, if you have been voting for politicians who promise to give you goodies at some time at someone else's expense, then you have no right to complain when they take your money and give it to someone else, including themselves. Always think that's worth reflecting. Thank you, viewers. Thank you for watching the Mike from Newlands show, and do take care.
Can I?
And yes,
can I add
final word. You certainly can have the final word.
Final thought. Thank you for watching this. And if there's one message I would like to leave you with, you can make a difference. If you look at the history of the Progressive Party, which has become the DA, and the journey, individuals from a single representative in Helen Suzman to the official opposition, it makes a difference. You, as an individual voter, can make a difference too. Do go out and vote. If you don't vote, you have no reason to complain.
Indeed. I sort of thank you for bringing that up. I forgot. Voter registration weekend is coming up next week.
Next weekend.
On Saturday and Sunday. So please take that opportunity to go and make sure that you are registered to vote. And just on that subject, if you can go at any time on your smartphone, type in IEC, am I right, Independent Electoral Commission, and I have an amazingly what's the word? Simple app. You can go on there and you type in your ID number, it'll tell you where you're registered, or if you're not, and if you're not, you can register yourself. The whole process takes a few minutes. So I urge you, if you haven't done that yet, get your cell phone out and do that, because as Demetri says, there is nothing worse than when you're really peed off with the way this country is going, and it's voting day, and you cannot make your feelings known.
And the key part about this is you can only vote in the voting station that you're registered at. So if you've moved from Joburg to Cape Town, for example, you will not be able to vote if you're still registered in Joburg.
Correct. So you must get your change of address done. And just one final thing, on picking up on Demetri's point, you can make a difference. If you look at the history of the Progressive Party, they snuck in sometimes with 7 or 8 votes, and I think Andrew Bahrain became, I think, on 5 votes or something when when he won that constituency. So your vote definitely does count. Do not for a second think it doesn't. It really, really does. So please, ladies and gentlemen, viewers, make an effort. Do go onto your app, go on your smartphone, sort it out, be ready. The election is going to come around faster than you know. It's going to be May, I guess. I think I've been told by my sources. Yeah. And so it's just around the corner, and you need to be ready to know that you can vote and express your opinion as to where you think South Africa should be going. So once again, thanks very much. It's my show. I normally get the last word, but here Demetri stole my last word. So Demetri, thanks very much for bringing that up. It's so important. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for viewing. And as I say, do take care.